Earlier in life, I spent years in relationships, jobs, and routines that weren't aligned with who I was, and I knew it. I knew I needed to make changes, but I kept telling myself someday, because the conditions weren't right, and there was no crisis forcing my hand, and sometimes I was afraid. Afraid of disappointing people, afraid of the disruption, afraid of the uncertainty, so I did nothing. And nothing turned into years. If that sounds familiar, you need to hear this, because here's what I learned the hard way, and this has helped me not put off or avoid things I need to address. Later isn't a plan. It's a coping mechanism. It's a lie you tell yourself so inaction feels responsible instead of cowardly. And for every man over 40 watching this, later has one final destination. Never. Not because you ran out of time, but because you ran out of the courage to start while you were just waiting for the right moment. The reality is, most men don't fail because they're lazy or unmotivated. They fail because they've convinced themselves that postponing the hard things is the same as being strategic about it. That waiting for ideal conditions is smart. That someday is a promise they're making to themselves, rather than a permanent postponement they're hoping will eventually stop mattering. And the cultural messages support this delusion. We're told that patience is a virtue, that good things come to those who wait, that timing is everything, and you shouldn't make big decisions when you're emotional or uncertain. And of course, there's truth to these statements, but in the wrong context, they become traps. They all sound reasonable until you realize it's the same advice that keeps men trapped in wrong marriages, dead-end careers, or half-lived lives for decades. Because the reality is, there's never a perfect time to disrupt your life. The conditions are never ideal for difficult conversations. You're never going to wake up one morning feeling completely certain and unafraid. So you wait. And while you're waiting, later is doing its quiet work. Not preserving your options, but eliminating them. Not keeping possibilities alive, but slowly killing them through neglect. The next thing you know, you're 45, 50, 55, and that career change you've been thinking about and talking about all the time for 5 years, still thinking about it. That conversation with your wife about what's really been going on in your marriage, still hasn't happened. That move to the place where you actually wanted to live, the business you wanted to start, those courses you wanted to take, the new hobby you were going to look into, the relationship you knew needed to end, all of them are still in the someday pile, waiting for conditions that will never arrive. And here's the thing nobody tells you. The longer you wait, the harder it gets. Not because the action itself becomes more difficult, but because you've now invested years in the story that you're the kind of man who doesn't act. You built an identity around being patient, being reasonable, not being impulsive. And changing that story is about admitting the hard part. That thing you called wisdom, that was just fear. And the patience, that was years of being paralyzed. The uncomfortable truth is this: you're not actually waiting for the right time to do that thing. You're waiting for the fear to go away, and you're calling that patience. You're not waiting for the right time to have that conversation. You're hoping the relationship will degrade enough that you won't have to. You're not waiting for clarity about the big decision. You're hoping it'll somehow make itself so you don't have to choose. Later gives you temporary relief from the discomfort of action. It lets you keep all of your options theoretically open while practically closing all of them. It allows you to avoid the immediate pain of disruption, disappointment, and difficult conversations at the cost of the slow erosion of everything that could actually make your life fulfilling. And the really sneaky part, later feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like you're being thoughtful and measured instead of reactive and restless. So you can live in postponement for years while telling yourself and everyone else that you're just being strategic about timing. But here's what strategic really looks like. Recognizing that waiting isn't neutral. Every day you spend in the wrong situation is a day you're not spending in the right one. Every conversation you postpone is a conversation that becomes harder to have. Every change you delay is a change that becomes more costly to make. And let's get more specific. Here are 3 patterns where men over 40 allow later to kill their lives. See if you're stuck in one of these. The first one is the trap of pretending. Someday I'll stop pretending and live how I actually want. This one's about maintaining the appearance of a stable, respectable life while quietly knowing it's not the one you actually want. And the way out is to stop waiting for clarity and start acting on your truth. This is the dead marriage where you're still going through the motions, the career that looks successful but feels like you're slowly dying inside, the life that checks all the boxes but leaves you empty. You know it's not right. You've known for years, but there's no crisis forcing your hand, so you keep waiting for the right time to make a change. The fear, disappointing people who have known you as the stable guy, looking like a failure for walking away from what you've built, admitting that the last 10, 15, 20 years might have been the wrong path. So you stay. And every year you stay, it gets harder to leave. Not because the situation improves, but because you've now invested even more time in something that was never going to work. And you tell yourself you'll deal with it when the kids get older, when work settles down, when you have more clarity. But the kids grow up, work never settles down, and clarity doesn't come from waiting. It comes from acting. Meanwhile, you're spending the best years you have left pretending to be fine in a situation that's slowly killing you inside. You're aging in a life that no longer fits, and deep down, you know it. The second trap is the fantasy of the future. Someday, I'll finally pursue what's mine. This one's about staying stuck in preparation mode, confusing endless planning and research with real movement. And the way out is to accept that readiness comes after action, not before it. This is the business you've been talking about starting, the move you keep researching but never make, the creative project that stays permanently in the planning phase, the risk you know you want to take but just can't quite pull the trigger on. You've done the research, run the numbers, you've thought about it endlessly, but you never actually do it because as long as it stays in someday, you get to keep the fantasy that you would be great at it without having to face the reality of whether you actually would be. The fear? Finding out you're not as capable as you imagined. Or worse, succeeding and then having to live up to it, which means you can't go back to the comfortable mediocrity you've been hiding in. So you keep preparing. You keep researching. You keep waiting for the moment when you feel ready, when the conditions will be perfect, when the risk will feel manageable. But that moment never comes because readiness doesn't arrive through more planning. It arrives through action. And every year you spend preparing is a year you're not spending building the thing that could actually fulfill you. Meanwhile, you watch other people, less prepared, less qualified, less strategic than you, actually doing the thing you've been thinking about. And you tell yourself it's because they're reckless or lucky or don't understand the risks like you do. But the truth is simpler. They acted and you didn't. The third pattern is simple avoidance. Someday I'll deal with what I'm avoiding. This one's about keeping the peace on the surface or just avoiding the thing while hoping the problem will fix itself. And the way out is to face the discomfort directly before it grows into a crisis that makes the choice for you. This is the hard conversation you need to have with your wife, your kids, your business partner, the health issue you keep putting off addressing, the emotional work you know you need to do but keep pushing down the list because other things feel more urgent. You tell yourself you'll handle it when things settle down, when you have more bandwidth, when the timing is better. But things never settle down. You never have more bandwidth, and the timing is never better. Meanwhile, the thing you're avoiding gets bigger, harder to address, and more costly the longer you wait. The fear? What you'll discover when you actually look at it. That the conversation will end the relationship. That the health issue is serious. That the emotional work will require you to admit things about yourself you've been avoiding for decades. So you keep it on the back burner. You keep telling yourself, it's not that urgent. You keep finding reasons why today isn't the day to deal with it. But here's what happens. The thing you're avoiding doesn't stay stable. It grows. The conversation that could have cleared the air 3 years ago now requires unraveling 3 years of resentment and distance. The health issue that could have been caught early now requires serious intervention. The emotional work that could have been done gradually now hits you all at once in a crisis that you can't avoid. And when you finally are forced to deal with it, not because you chose to, but because you have no choice, it's harder, more painful, and more costly than it ever would have been if you just faced it when you first knew you needed to. So the choice is simple. You can keep that life you talk about in the someday file until you're too old to pursue it, or you can start building it messily, incrementally, imperfectly, starting today. Here's what you need to understand. The men who actually change their lives in their 40s, 50s, and later aren't the ones who waited for the perfect conditions. They're the ones who recognized that later was killing them and decided that imperfect action now was better than perfect planning never. They had the hard conversation even though they didn't have all the answers. They left the job even though they didn't know how the next one would work out. They made the move even though they couldn't guarantee the outcome. They stopped waiting for certainty and started acting on what they already knew. So ask yourself, are you genuinely waiting for better conditions? Or are you hoping the problem will solve itself so you don't have to? Are you collecting information you actually need? Or are you collecting reasons to keep postponing? Are you being strategic about timing? Or are you just afraid? Because if you're being honest with yourself, you already know the answers. You know whether that thing you've been saying you'll do later is actually something you're planning to do or something you're hoping will stop mattering. Here's what I learned. Regret isn't about the things you tried and failed at. Regret is about the things you never tried because you were too busy waiting for conditions that never arrived. It's about the conversations you never had, the risks you never took, the versions of yourself you never became, all because later felt safer than now. And the tragic thing is, later doesn't feel safer because it is safer. It feels safer because the cost is invisible. You can't see the years you're losing. You can't feel the experiences you're missing. You can't touch the person you could have become if you'd stopped waiting and started acting. But those costs are real. More real in many ways than the immediate discomfort of disruption you're avoiding. Because disruption is temporary. The discomfort of difficult conversations passes. The uncertainty of new beginnings resolves. But the regret of a life spent waiting, that's permanent. Let me know what resonates and what you'd add to this conversation. And if you're a guy over 40 wanting to build a better second chapter, subscribe for more content like this.